Anything else in that first episode that you can think of?
Not much that I can think of. How about yourself?
No, nothing, because I'm really excited to get to that bottle because it's time to have a drink.
Oh yeah.
All right, so Mike, what's in that bottle?
Today, in that bottle for episode 2, we are going to the New World. We did a little Italiano in episode 1, and we're taking it to Cali. Very classic California today. We have a Cabernet Sauvignon. This is produced by a winery called Clos Du Val. It's in Napa Valley. We are tasting the 2013 vintage. This was considered a pretty great vintage in Napa Valley in general, kind of a banner vintage for Cabernet. I remember when the 13 started first coming out, there was just a ton of hype. There was a lot of big praise coming out of the big wine publications about 13 Napa Valley Cabernet.
And that was like the first vintage, like 2010 was another one of those. And like 9, 10, and then it kind of died way down for 11. And wasn't a lot of hype on 12, but then 13 was like, it had been a few vintages since they kind of hit that home run, I felt like. And we got a lot of buzz on that.
Yeah, so it was kind of getting fired back up. 2011, I actually got married in 2011, and we went to California for our honeymoon, and we visited a few different regions, but Napa and Sonoma was one of them. And that was definitely a really tough vintage, very, very cold. We were there in August, and on the valley floor and up in the mountains especially, the grapes weren't even getting ripe yet. They were like the red grapes, like Cabernet, were literally green.
Wow.
In color, where that's called veraison, and that typically happens way earlier than August in a normal harvest. So they did have a tough vintage, not much for people to get super excited about, I suppose, and it's not really going to sell wine magazine subscriptions talking about that particular year. But yeah, fast forward to 2013, and they really did have something to talk about. So we have one of the classics here, Clos Du Val, 2013 Napa Cab.
Yeah, so I just took my first big gulp of it, and it's a beast. I mean, it's still pretty darn young, even with its 6 years of age going with it right now. So I'm really interested to kind of get your take, and because this is like the perfect wine for this subject. What we're going to talk about today with points, right? But what's your initial thoughts on the wine?
I think that this wine is showing a lot of elegance and really putting forward the classic fruit that is associated with this vintage, like powerful, ripe, forward, and juicy and delicious type fruit flavors. I'm actually almost drooling on this microphone too because of the acidity being bright and lively. There's a lot of great balance with this wine. We just popped it not too long ago. Perhaps we would normally want to decant this for a few hours, let see how things open up. But initially it's very fruit forward with a ton of not a ton. Let me take that back. A really pronounced amount of oak. Yeah. Spice on top of that fruit. Classic for Napa Valley Cab, of course, aged in mostly new French wood barrels. But I feel like with a little bit of age that it's at right now, it's still a baby, but it's starting to kind of integrate together. And I don't know, I'm pretty impressed. I got a soft spot for Napa Cab. I love it. I know you do, and I'd be thrilled to enjoy this bottle with a nice filet mignon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you on that. The reason I didn't open it earlier or even yesterday is because I think most people pop and pour, right? And most people are going to open a bottle, they're going to pour it in a glass, and they're going to drink it. I like to experience it the way most others will drink it first, and then I'll let it get some time. If I was going to have a dinner party, I think I'd serve this now, because I think with a couple hours in a decanter, if you're having, like you said, some leaner steak, I think this would go perfectly, and I think it's drinking really, really well now.
So. Agreed. And I love the pop and pour myself. Maybe not the pop and pour and drink it all, but I'm glad that you didn't pre-decant it, because I love for the wine bottle to tell its story. I want to see what it's like right when you pop the cork. And even just if you don't have a decanter, just having it sit in the glass for 15 or 20 minutes, that really opens it up. And getting wine out of the bottle will open it up as well. So, maybe by the time we get to the end of this episode, in about 3 hours or so, we'll really see what it's tasting like. But I would say overall, I think this is a very good wine, very solid. And I would probably rate this one thumb up and one thumb sideways.
So I'm gonna play if this wine were a movie.
Okay.
So I agree with you. This is classic. It's long. It's kind of dark and brooding. It's got a lot of power behind it. If this wine were a movie, I'm gonna say it's like The Godfather.
Wow.
Because it is now
Number one?
It's classic. Yeah, yes, because Godfather 2 to me was the best of the two that were made. We don't acknowledge that third thing. I don't know what that was, but shouldn't even be in the conversation, right? And if a wine was reminding me of Godfather 3, I'm probably pouring it down the drain. So, but I'm going with Godfather because it's long. It's controversial, like to love. It's like you got that little guilty pleasure of putting that at the top of your favorite movies of all time. But there's something about Napa Cabernet that always reminds me of just that time where you've got the time to love it, right? And with Godfather, you got to invest your time in it. I feel the same way with this wine, and not everybody agreed with that, right? So we're going to talk once we kind of get through the history and kind of how the point system works. We're going to talk about the points that were given to this wine and why, some conclusions out of that, like that we've come to over the years. Because believe me, it's helped sell a lot of wine for a lot of people. So, that's all I got on the wine. Do you want to jump into the topic?
Yeah, actually, just one more quick point about the wine here, the Clos Du Val, that I think it's worth bringing up here because this is pre. The scoring that came out, right, in the maybe late 70s, which we'll get into, but in the early 70s, there was a very famous wine tasting known as the Judgment of Paris.
Oh, yeah.
Put on by Stephen Spurrier, where he brought a bunch of California wines to a very, a tasting panel in France, in Paris, of some of the leading wine experts of the time over in France, and they put up the California wines versus classic French wines, and the Cabernet Sauvignons that they brought from Napa Valley included the 1972 bottling of Clos Du Val Cabernet Sauvignon, and here we are drinking the 2013. So this wine and this winery, I should say, really helped put Napa Valley on the map. This was such an important turning point for California wine and Napa Valley wine to be taken seriously for how good it was. It was probably a much different style than what we're used to today, no doubt, and we'll probably touch on that as we get going on the topic of scoring. But a little piece of history that we're drinking here today.
Yeah, I think that maybe that's another reason that I kind of related to the Godfather, right? It's kind of from the 70s. It was popular then, and even now, like the bottle, the label is still kind of old-fashioned compared to a lot of new labels, right? It's a classic. Chateau Montelena would be another one that comes to mind from that Judgment of Paris tasting, and kind of an old school winery. So kind of fun stuff. I mean, in terms of if you're going to drink some history in Napa, it doesn't get much better than these guys. So
no, not at all. And I'm sitting here actually drinking this wine and not tasting it because it's really starting to open up and get delicious. And there's some really just beautiful notes of green olive and fresh garden herbs starting to come out. Anyway, this is going to be fun. So let's get into this topic of scoring